wonder where you were going. Mulholland Drive. That's where I was going. Mulholland Drive.
In 2001, David Lynch released Mulholland Drive. The film was critically acclaimed and is still talked about today. There are about a million different things to talk about when it comes to Mulholland Drive. The symbols, the dreams, the different interpretations of the narrative. One of the scenes that stands out to me takes place at Winky's, and it involves the homeless man behind the dumpster. This scene has stayed with me. I have never been more horrified in my life, and even on subsequent viewings I was terrified of what I knew was coming. This video essay will study the craft of that scene and why it's so scary, by using Freud's theory on the uncanny and a close analysis of the film's rhythm, movement, color, space, and shape.
Silencio.
First, we need to understand what the uncanny is according to Freud. A simple definition is anything that reminds us of earlier psychic stages, of aspects of our unconscious life, or of a primitive experience of humans. These can include castration, a double, an involuntary repetition or compulsion to repeat, and animistic conceptions of the universe. These play an important role in this scene. Before I begin to talk about the scene, we need a way to talk about the characters. In the scene itself, they are never named, but in the screenplay, Dan is the character with the thick eyebrows and dark hair, while Herb is the character with the lighter hair. I will reference them as Dan and Herb from this point on. The way the scene plays with space is interesting. This first part of the scene uses shot and reverse shot and very classical editing. It seems like a pretty normal scene, but as we look closer, we feel the camera as it hovers, up and down. There's no real pattern to it. We don't always know where the camera will look, but we know it will be in the same spot. It gives us an unsettled feeling.
Okay.
In his essay on the uncanny, Freud explores the definitions of Heimlich and unheimlich, uses these to explain the uncanny. Heimlich is a word that means familiar or belonging to the house. Very related to this is its second definition, which means concealed or secret as something that you would hide in a house. Unheimlich is the opposite of Heimlich. Its first definition means unhomely, unfamiliar, uncomfortable, the opposite of Heimlich. The second definition of unheimlich is unconcealed, unsecret, which can also mean revealed. The camera work in this scene feels Heimlich. It's familiar, it's homely to us, but it's also unheimlich because of the slight movement. It's unfamiliar, but because of the unfamiliarity, it's also revealing something.
You're in both dreams.
Here are consecutive shots of Herb and Dan during the telling of the dream. The camera pushes in on the characters as the dream progresses. This is used to show the intensity of what is being told. Lynch continues to use this technique throughout the scene. Here we see Herb at the counter, and then we look back to Dan. When we come back to Herb, it'll push in closer on his face, and then closer in on Dan. Again, we can feel the intensity of what's happening in the scene. This is again used one more time when Dan sees the homeless man. As the camera pushes in, there's a jump cut to his face. The repetition of this technique is uncanny itself. Here is one more example where Lynch uses repetition for an uncanny feeling.
Right over there.
First, when Herb recreates the dream at the counter, then, when Dan looks over his shoulder, the dream is becoming repeated in the narrative, but also through the repetition of the same shots. Let's talk about how colors used. The logo for Winky's is pale yellow and teal. The jackets that Herb and Dan wear are dark green, dark blue, black. They're muted. The restaurant has similar colors. We see the yellow signs, the green signs. It all communicates a kind of familiarity. We, like Herb, might be ashamed of eating at Winky's,
To Winkies?
but we've all been there. We've all done it. It is part of America. The drab colors and lighting of Winky's work in contrast to what we see when Denton and Herb leave the restaurant. We see half light and half shadow on their face. The light makes them feel exposed. It feels unfamiliar. As they go down the stairs, their coats blend in with the shrubs and the restaurant. The dark greens and blacks are contrasted with the back alley, which is white. This contrast creates an unease and unfamiliarity. When we finally see the homeless man, he's pitch black against the white. He's pure evil in color, but at the same time, he now is the same color as Dan and Herb. Color works in the scene to move us from the familiarity of Winky's to the unfamiliar back alley, and then back to the familiar color of the hobo. It feels uncanny because the hobo, who is the evil in the scene, is represented by the same colors as Dan and Herb. The set design in the scene plays an important role too. Winky's is itself uncanny. It's a recreation, a double, of the American's 50s diner. It's fakely familiar. We then move to the dumpster alley. It is part of Winky's but opposite. It's not clean and sterile but disorganized. There's no painted walls, but there is nonsensical graffiti. Instead of shrubs and trees, there's barbed wire that protects the neighbors from the back alley. They are opposite from each other, but part of each other. Let's use Heimlich and unheimlich again. Here, I'm going to replace Heimlich with Winky's, something familiar, and then I'm going to replace unheimlich with the back alley, something unfamiliar. The definition reveals to us Winky's is familiar, but it also is concealing something. It's secret. This is a place where we tell secrets about our dreams. The back alley, while uncomfortable and unfamiliar, reveals something about the world, something about us. Let's talk a little bit about the shots and the movement in the second half of this scene. The two-shot here looks at Dan and Herb, while the POV represents Dan's viewpoint. They combine to show recognition of objects from Dan's dream. He's currently experiencing the double, the compulsion to repeat his dream, and there's an animistic conception that his dream can control reality. The editing plays with these shots. Through the POV, we have a recognition of what Dan is seeing. And then when we see his face, we also see how he's reacting to the world. When Dan finally sees the button, he collapses to the ground in shock. The camera pushes in on his face, and we witness the horror through his eyes and his face. After Dan is collapsed on the ground, we return to his point of view shot. This is not possible though, he's on the ground. We've been inserted into the film. It's a childish thought, but it exists for a split second, and captures the uncanny of the scene. The sound in the scene plays an important role as the signifier of the uncanny. When we first enter the diner, there's background noises, the talking sounds normal, we can hear cars driving outside. But as Dan begins to tell his story, the noises fade out and a drone enters. Let's close our eyes and listen as it happens.
And I'm scared like I can't tell you. Of all people, you're standing right over there. By that counter. You're in both dreams. And you're scared. I get even more frightened when I see how afraid you are, and then I realize what it is. There's a man in back of this place. He's the one who's doing it. I can see him through the wall. I can see his face. I hope that I never see that face ever outside of a dream.
The drone remains throughout the scene, a reminder of the uncanny. But as the uncanny is confirmed, the drone will change to highlight what we're witnessing. Here's an example as Dan realizes the dream is being recreated in real life.
Right then.
As they open the door to leave the restaurant, a new world of sound exists. It sounds like they're underwater, almost like they're in a womb. This references the uncanny again. The womb is something familiar from when we were babies, but we have repressed over time. In this scene, it now returns through the sound. A descending string tone signifies when Dan recognizes things from his dream. Again, this signifies the recognition of the uncanny world. As they descend the stairs, they approach the dumpster. Their first steps begin to echo. As we approach the dumpster, there is again the descending string tone. Right at that moment, we feel the man will reveal himself. But it waits. It keeps going. Until we see the homeless man. I've noticed two interesting things about the sound in this moment. Before the homeless man appears, the highest the sound gets to is minus 12 decibels, but jumps over 0 when he appears. Also, when Dan and Herb go outside, the sound continues to drop, from negative 24 to negative 36 decibels before the reveal of the homeless man. Now that the sound is broken, the uncanny's been confirmed, the sound fuzzes against itself, and then we're gone. These techniques are used to increase the uncanniness of the scene. Even without looking through the narrative and the specifics of the dream, the uncanny has been built through the use of sound, editing, space, color, amongst other things. By using Freud's theory of the uncanny and combining it with impeccable craft, Lynch has created one of the most horrifying scenes of all time.